So last time we did pure monopoly, okay, and today we're going to look at two different sort of variations, other variations of monopoly, okay, that differ slightly from pure monopoly. Okay, so the first is, last time we talked about a monopolist who couldn't price discriminate, okay? And so what price discrimination is it's an ability to know, it's an ability to charge the consumer the price that she is willing to pay, okay? So in order to do that, a business would have to know essentially they would have to know, get inside every consumer's brain, right? And know exactly what each person they sold to was willing to pay if they want to price discriminate. That's really hard to do, right? Obviously. You see it, okay? Some businesses can get pretty close to that. So for example, if you go on Interim and you go to some night market somewhere and you want to buy some souvenir from somebody in that night market, you say, I'll give you 5 rupees for that, right? And what do they say? I want 100 rupees, right? You say, I don't want to pay 100 rupees. Okay, I'll give you 20, right? And eventually you get to, you have a price in your head, right, that you're willing to pay, right? And eventually, if they give you that price, you'll buy it at that price. And so that gets that business, right, the person selling whatever souvenirs that they're selling, gets close to exactly what you're willing to pay. Okay? But for businesses that sell lots and lots and lots of goods, right, that's not a very efficient way of doing business. So for the most part, they just charge one price to everybody. So that's what we looked at last time, a business that charges one price for every good it sells. Okay. Now, businesses, even big businesses, can differentiate their market, can segregate their market, okay? Knowing that different consumers have different elasticities of demand for the product that they're selling, okay? So for example, the airline industry segregates its market by the time frame in which people buy the tickets that they want to purchase. If I'm buying tickets 6, 7, 8, 9 months out, which I'm trying to do right now to go home in summertime back to the United States, the tickets are relatively cheap. Right? If I'm trying to buy tickets to go to the United States next week, they're going to be relatively expensive. And the reason for this is that the airlines understand, they know that if I'm traveling 6 or 7 months from now, it's probably the case that I have a relatively elastic demand. Well, why? Right? First of all, it's not urgent. It's obviously not as much of a necessity now, right, as if I had to travel next week. Second of all, if I have 8 months to explore the market, there are far more substitutes I might be able to find, okay? Or alternatives I might be able to find, okay? So I'm not going to be as, I'll be more sensitive to price, okay? So I'll have a more elastic demand. As opposed to next week. If I travel next week, I'm going to pretty much have to take whatever flight I get, right? And if I'm calling the airline saying I have to travel next week, it's probably a pretty urgent situation. It's a big business meeting I have to get to. There was a death in the family, or something like this, okay? So they understand that my elasticity of demand is more inelastic if I'm in a situation where I'm trying to buy the ticket a week or a day in advance. And so they can charge me more without worrying about losing my sale or losing the purchase, right? Okay, so that's price discrimination. So the only form of price discrimination that we have to know in AP economics is first degree price discrimination. There are other forms of it, but even though Mr. Welker, for example, does that on his videos, he does that partially because he's teaching students who are taking the IB exam. You do have to know it for the IB exam, but you don't have to know it for the AP exam. You do need to know first degree price discrimination, but not second and third. So here's what first degree price discrimination looks like on a graph. Okay? The idea here is that the business can charge exactly what the consumer is willing to pay. So for the first unit of output here, they would charge a price somewhere up here in the demand curve, exactly what that first good could sell for. The second unit, they would charge this price, and the third, and so forth and so on. Okay? Which means that consumers get no consumer surplus, right? They're paying exactly what they're willing to pay, and therefore consumer surplus equals zero. Okay? So one of the effects of price discrimination is that it eliminates consumer surplus if it's done perfectly, right? Okay? The second thing to note here, in terms of understanding the difference between pure monopoly and price discriminating monopoly, is that the monopolist, the price he or she charges is exactly equal to what the consumer is willing to pay, right? And so the price is equal to their marginal revenue, right? They do have to charge a lower price for producing more output, but they don't have to drop the price for all of the previous units of output. And so whereas with pure monopoly, that causes the marginal revenue curve to be below the demand curve, in price discriminating monopoly, they are the same. The demand curve and the marginal revenue curve are the same, okay? And so then, as in pure monopoly, the price discriminating monopolist will choose output where marginal cost equals marginal revenue here, okay? So that's PD for price discriminating, okay? There's no price here on the vertical axis because the price discriminator is charging multiple prices, right? Okay, depending on which unit of output she's selling. Okay, and her profits are equal to this area here. Okay, she charges this much for the first unit, this much for the second, and so forth. Those are her profits. Okay, so profits for the price discriminator are much greater than the profits for the pure monopolist. And the final sort of thing to note in terms of the differences is that the pure monopolist creates a deadweight loss as they restrict output. Okay, there's less output in that market than a perfectly competitive market. In this market, okay, with the price discriminator will produce output at the efficient quantity, at the socially optimal quantity, where marginal cost and marginal benefit are equal. Okay? With natural monopoly, okay, a natural monopoly is one where the startup costs are extremely high. Okay? So, for example, railroads, airlines. We used to think of those businesses as we're called natural monopolies, because to start a railroad, you have to lay all the tracks first. Okay, so the startup costs are extremely high. Okay, and your average total cost you're going to reduce as you produce more output in any industry, right? As you're applying increasing levels of quantity against your fixed costs, your average total costs are going to fall. But typically, in most industries, the average total cost curve begins to slope up, okay, long before it intersects demand. Okay, so over a relatively short range of output is the average total cost curve sloping down in most industries. But in industries with very high startup costs, the range in which those average total costs are falling is much greater. Okay? And so, as a matter of the model, in natural monopoly, we would say that the average total cost curve is sloping down as it crosses the demand curve, by definition. So anytime you are asked to draw a natural monopoly on the graph, the average total cost curve must be sloping down through the demand curve. How do I know it's sloping down? The marginal cost curve cuts the average total cost curve at its minimum to the right of demand. So make sure you note those things and you understand them. Okay. So you'll notice here that at this point, okay, if the monopolist were to charge this price and produce this quantity, okay, this would be the lowest price, excuse me, the lowest average cost, the most efficient use of resources that is possible. Obviously, once you pass the demand curve, okay, there's no reason to produce beyond there. But even if you produced here, okay, this is your lowest average cost possible. This is with one business. If there were two businesses in this industry, say just for sake of argument, each producing half of the output, something like here, then your average cost would be higher and you would actually have a less efficient industry. So the interesting thing about natural monopoly is that this is a unique situation, one in which having one business in the entire industry is more efficient than having multiple businesses competing. Okay? And so then the conclusion that economists draw from that is that this industry in this industry there should be only one business. Okay? So we call those natural monopolies. That's why, for example, in many countries there's only one railroad. Singapore electricity, right? Okay? Those are good examples of natural monopolies. Okay. So the problem is, of course, how do you achieve this outcome? And what are the problems once you have achieved this outcome of one business? Okay. So if there's one business in this industry, it's obviously going to charge the monopoly price and produce the monopoly quantity. Okay, so we're going to restrict output away from the socially optimal level of output. Okay, and so what are the solutions to this? Okay, because what the government wants, these are typically industries where, or they're often industries with things that are products that are really necessary. They're true necessities to people. Things like water and electricity. Okay, and so they don't. So the government doesn't want to have one business in this industry restricting output of things like water and electricity. Okay? And so it has a number of options. One, it can just let the industry operate and we'll get the monopoly quantity, okay, without interfering. Okay. Two, it can regulate the industry. Okay? So if it regulates the industry, what it will do is it will mandate a price. And so in this industry, you must charge this price, and then once the business has to charge that price, that will dictate the quantity that they produce. So obviously the government would want the natural monopolist to produce the socially optimal level of output, where marginal cost and marginal benefit are equal, right? The problem here is that if the government requires the monopolist to charge the socially optimal price and produce the socially optimal quantity, the average revenue, which is just the price, right, of the monopolist will be less than the average cost. And so the monopolist would be making a loss. They'd go out of business. Okay? If the government still wants to do that, there's a solution to that. Okay? They can pay the monopolist a per unit subsidy equal to the difference between the socially optimal price, its average revenue, and the average cost at the socially optimal quantity. Okay, so that would be a rectangle something like this. Per unit would be something like this. Okay? Obviously that's going to come out of taxpayer money, so there are inefficiencies there. Okay? So that's one solution, to subsidize the monopolist, okay? And that induces it and force them to charge a socially optimal price, allowing them to earn a zero economic profit. Okay. The second solution is to force them to charge what's called the fair return price. So this is a socially optimal price and the socially optimal quantity. This would be the fair return price. And the fair return quantity. Okay, so at this price, the business will produce this quantity, which is greater than the monopoly quantity, so we're getting closer to efficiency, but still less than the socially optimal quantity, so there's still some deadweight loss. Okay, but it's a better outcome than this one in terms of efficiency. Okay? And the monopolist will earn a zero economic profit. Okay, so this is the second solution is for the government to force the monopolist to charge what's known as the fair return price. The fair return price being a price which gives the monopolist a profit which is equal to the profit they would make in a competitive market, a zero economic profit. Okay? The final remedy the government has at its disposal is to run the industry itself. What is known as public ownership. Okay? So there's a time when airlines were national. They were owned by the national government. Thus, Singapore Airlines, British Air. Okay? There was a time when those were national carriers. Right? Okay? The rail system in Britain, owned by the government, right? Managed by the government. Okay? Now the thing is, if the government runs the industry, then the government can charge the socially optimal price, produce the socially optimal quantity, and take a loss. Who pays the loss? Taxpayers, right? Okay? Somewhat similar to just subsidizing a private producer. Okay, somewhat similar, except you have a government running instead of a private producer, and there are differences there, right? But nevertheless, okay, it allows the government to charge the socially optimal price, produce the socially optimal quantity, and achieve the allocatedly efficient outcome. Okay, so a number of things to take away from this. One, in an industry that's a natural monopoly, average total cost is downward sloping is decreasing throughout the entire range of demand. Therefore, one business would be more efficient than many. There are several ways, or many ways, for the government to achieve that outcome: public ownership, regulation. Two kinds of regulation force them to charge the socially optimal price and subsidize, or a second one force them to charge the fair return price. Okay, so that they can earn a zero economic profit. And finally, the government has the option of just letting the industry operate without regulation, without interference. Okay, that's it. That's a wrap. You turn that off? Thanks.